Rachel had been staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The office was unusually quiet for a Thursday afternoon. Most people had already left for an early weekend, but she stayed behind, pretending to be busy while actually replaying the conversation from earlier that day. It happened in the break room. She was pouring her third coffee of the day when Daniel walked in. They'd worked in the same building for almost a year now. Different departments, but their paths crossed often enough. He worked in the creative team upstairs, and she'd always noticed something different about him. While everyone else rushed through their lunch breaks scrolling through their phones, he'd sit by the window with a worn notebook, sketching or writing something she could never quite see. They'd exchanged plenty of hellos and small talk about weather and weekend plans, but nothing more. Rachel had convinced herself that's all it would ever be. Just two coworkers being polite. So when Daniel cleared his throat and said her name that afternoon, she nearly dropped her coffee mug. "Hey, Rachel, I know this might seem random, but would you want to hang out this Saturday?" His voice was steady, but she noticed his hand gripping the counter a bit too tightly. Her heart did that annoying flutter thing she'd only read about in books. Like hang out, hang out? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she immediately felt her cheeks flush. Daniel smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that made her stomach flip. "Yeah, a proper date if you're interested." She was interested. Very interested, but she tried to play it cool, nodding casually like this happened to her all the time. "Sure, that sounds nice. Great." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope. Not a text with an address, not a quick "I'll pick you up at 7." An actual envelope with her name written on it in careful handwriting. "Everything you need to know is in here. Saturday, 10 in the morning. Dress comfortable. And maybe bring a jacket." Before she could ask any questions, he gave her another one of those genuine smiles and walked out, leaving her standing there with a coffee mug in one hand and a mysterious envelope in the other. The rest of Thursday disappeared in a blur. Rachel tried to focus on work, but her eyes kept drifting to the envelope sitting on her desk. She wanted to open it immediately, but something told her to wait, to let the anticipation build. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, she practically ran to her car. Sitting in the parking lot, she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn map. Not a printed Google Maps direction, but an actual illustrated map with little landmarks and tiny drawings. There was a small coffee cup sketched near what looked like her apartment building, a tree with detailed leaves marking a turn, and a question mark at the destination. At the bottom, in the same careful handwriting, it said, "Trust the journey. See you at 10. That night, Rachel did what any reasonable person would do. She panicked. She called her best friend Amy and put her on speaker while she tore through her closet. What does dress comfortable even mean? Rachel held up a sundress, then tossed it on the growing pile on her bed. Is this a hiking date? A casual brunch date? What if I'm overdressed? What if I'm underdressed? Amy's laugh crackled through the phone. "Girl, breathe." He said comfortable. That means jeans and a nice top. You're overthinking this. But what if comfortable means fancy comfortable? Like business casual comfortable? Rachel, stop. The man gave you a hand-drawn map. He's clearly putting thought into this. Just be yourself and wear something you feel good in. Rachel knew Amy was right, but knowing it and feeling it were two different things. She hadn't been on a real date in almost 2 years. Her last relationship had ended badly, with someone who forgot her birthday and never remembered how she took her coffee. The idea that someone might actually put effort into a date felt foreign and slightly terrifying. Friday at work was torture. Every time Rachel saw Daniel in the hallway or across the cafeteria, her heart would speed up. They made eye contact once, and he gave her a small wave that made her trip over absolutely nothing. Smooth. Real smooth. She left work early, claiming a dentist appointment, and spent the afternoon doing all the things she told herself she wouldn't do. She tried on 17 different outfits. She changed her nail polish twice. She even pulled out the curling iron that had been sitting in her bathroom drawer for months. By Friday night, she'd settled on dark jeans, a soft blue sweater that Amy said made her eyes pop, and her favorite white sneakers. Comfortable but put together. She laid everything out on her chair like she was preparing for the first day of school. Sleep didn't come easy. Rachel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through a million scenarios. What if they had nothing to talk about? What if the date was awkward? What if he realized she was actually really boring? She'd spent so much time being just the quiet girl in accounting that she'd almost forgotten how to be anything else. But then she remembered the way Daniel had looked at her in the break room. Like he actually saw her. Like he'd been thinking about asking her out for a while and finally worked up the courage. That thought settled her nerves just enough to let sleep creep in. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through her curtains. Rachel woke up at 7 even though she'd set her alarm for 8. Nervous energy coursed through her veins. She made herself eat breakfast even though her stomach was doing gymnastics. She changed her outfit one more time, then changed it back. Applied makeup. Removed some of it. Reapplied it. At 9:45, she heard a car pull up outside her apartment. She peeked through the curtain and saw Daniel getting out of an older sedan that looked well-loved and well-maintained. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray Henley, and he checked his phone before looking up at her building. Rachel grabbed her jacket and purse, took one last look in the mirror and whispered to herself, "Okay, you've got this." She didn't actually believe it, but saying it out loud helped a little. She made herself wait until exactly 10 o'clock before walking downstairs. Playing it cool, totally casual, definitely not like she'd been ready for the past hour. Daniel's face lit up when he saw her walking toward the car. "Hey, you made it. Did you think I wouldn't?" She tried to sound playful, but her voice came out a bit shaky. "Honestly, I was about 60% sure you'd text me some emergency excuse." He opened the car door for her, which was such a small gesture but made her feel like she was in one of those romantic movies her mom loved. As she slid into the passenger seat, Rachel noticed the car smelled like coffee and something sweet. There was a travel mug in the cup holder and a small paper bag on the dashboard. Daniel got in the driver's side and handed her the bag. "I didn't know if you'd have time for breakfast, so I grabbed some croissants from that bakery on 5th Street, the one you mentioned liking." Rachel's hands froze holding the bag. "I mentioned that?" "Yeah, like a month ago. We were both waiting for the elevator and you were telling someone on the phone about their almond croissants." He remembered. He actually remembered a random conversation she'd completely forgotten about. Rachel felt something warm spread through her chest, pushing aside the nervousness. "Thank you," she said softly, meaning it more than he probably realized. Daniel started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but instead of heading toward downtown where all the restaurants and shops were, he drove in the opposite direction, toward the less developed part of town where buildings gave way to trees and open spaces. Rachel glanced at him, curiosity replacing her anxiety. "So are you going to tell me where we're going?" He smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. "Where's the fun in that? But I promise it'll be worth the mystery." And somehow sitting in that car with the morning sun warming her face and a boy who remembered her favorite bakery, Rachel believed him. Whatever this date was going to be, it was already different from anything she'd experienced before, and different was starting to feel like exactly what she needed. The city streets gradually transformed as they drove. Tall buildings became shorter. Concrete turned to trees. Rachel watched the familiar landmarks disappear and found herself relaxing into the seat. There was something calming about not knowing the destination, about trusting someone else with the plan. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting casually on the center console. The radio played softly, some indie station that wasn't trying too hard. Every so often he'd glance over at her, and each time she'd catch him, he'd smile like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. "You're not taking me to some weird abandoned warehouse, right?" Rachel joked, trying to ease the flutter of butterflies that wouldn't settle in her stomach. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "Probably not." Daniel laughed, a genuine sound that made her want to hear it again. "Fair enough. But I promise no warehouses, no weird cult meetings, just something I think you'll like." They drove for about 20 minutes, making turns that Rachel tried to follow but eventually gave up on. She recognized nothing out here. It was the kind of area people drove through to get somewhere else, never stopping to actually look around. Then Daniel slowed down and turned into what looked like an empty parking lot. Gravel crunched under the tires. There were no other cars, no buildings, just a stretch of cracked pavement with weeds pushing through and a wall of trees at the far end. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Okay, now I'm thinking warehouse." "Just wait." Daniel parked the car and got out, coming around to open her door before she could do it herself. "Come on, it's just a short walk." He led her toward the trees, and that's when she noticed it. A narrow trail, barely visible, cutting between the thick trunks. It looked like the kind of path that only people who knew about it could find. The kind of secret spot that didn't show up on any map. How did you even know this was here? Rachel asked as they stepped onto the trail. The sounds of distant traffic immediately faded, replaced by birdsong and the rustle of leaves. I like to explore, Daniel said, holding back a low branch so she could pass. I get restless sitting still too long. So I drive around on weekends, take random turns, see where they lead. Found this place about 6 months ago. The trail wasn't long, maybe a 5-minute walk, but it felt like stepping into a different world. The air was cooler under the canopy of trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in scattered patches. Rachel could hear water somewhere ahead. Then the trees opened up and she stopped walking. In front of them was a small lake she had no idea existed. The water was so still it looked like glass, perfectly reflecting the blue sky and the trees surrounding it. A few ducks glided across the surface, leaving gentle ripples in their wake. On the far side, the land rose into a small hill covered in trees that were just starting to turn autumn colors. Oranges and reds and yellows mixing with the green. Oh my God, Rachel breathed. This is beautiful, right? Daniel's voice held a quiet pride, like he was sharing something precious. And almost nobody knows about it. I've been here 4 times and never seen another person. But what really caught Rachel's attention wasn't just the lake. It was what Daniel had set up on the grassy area near the water's edge. A thick blanket was spread out with a wicker basket sitting in the center. A small portable speaker sat to one side, and there were actual plates and glasses, not paper or plastic. You did all this? Rachel turned to look at him, genuinely surprised. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking a bit shy. I came out here early this morning. Wanted to make sure everything was ready. I hope it's not too much. I know some people think picnics are cheesy. Are you kidding? This is amazing. And she meant it. When was the last time someone had put this much thought into anything for her? She couldn't remember. They walked over to the blanket and Rachel slipped off her shoes before sitting down. The grass was soft beneath the blanket, and from this angle the view of the lake was even more perfect. Daniel sat across from her and started unpacking the basket. Okay, so full disclosure, he said, pulling out containers. I'm not a great cook, but I can assemble things really well. He'd brought fresh fruit already cut up, some cheese and crackers, the croissants from earlier, and these little sandwiches that looked homemade. There was also a thermos that turned out to be filled with hot tea. Is that chamomile? Rachel asked as he poured some into a real ceramic mug, not a disposable cup. With honey, right? That's how you take it? Rachel felt her chest tighten. How do you know that? Daniel set the thermos down and looked at her directly. About 3 weeks ago, you were in the break room making tea. I came in to refill my water bottle, and you were telling someone, I think it was Beth from HR, about how chamomile with honey was the only thing that helped you relax after stressful days. She had said that. She remembered now. It had been after a particularly rough meeting with a difficult client. But the fact that Daniel had been paying attention, that he'd remembered something so small and specific, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. You're kind of observant, she said quietly, accepting the mug he handed her. Only about things that matter. They ate slowly, and the conversation flowed easier than Rachel expected. Daniel asked her about her job, but not in that surface-level way people usually did. He wanted to know what she actually liked about it, what frustrated her, what she'd do differently if she could. And he listened. Really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to talk. Rachel found herself opening up more than she planned. She told him about how she'd wanted to be an artist when she was younger, but convinced herself it wasn't practical. How accounting was safe and stable, but sometimes felt like she was living someone else's life. How she kept a sketchbook at home that she barely touched anymore because she was always too tired after work. Why'd you stop drawing? Daniel asked, popping a grape into his mouth. I don't know. Life got busy. And I guess I felt like if I wasn't going to be professionally good at it, what was the point? That's sad, Rachel blinked. What? I just mean, not everything has to be about being the best or making money. Sometimes things can just be for you, for the joy of doing them. He pulled out his worn notebook from his jacket pocket. Can I show you something? She nodded and he opened the notebook to a random page. It was filled with sketches. Some were detailed drawings of buildings, others were quick studies of people's faces, random objects, patterns. They were good. Really good. These are incredible, Rachel said, carefully turning the pages. Thanks. But here's the thing. I'm never going to be in a gallery. I'm never going to sell these for thousands of dollars. And that's okay. I draw because it makes me happy. Because it helps me see the world differently. That's enough. He flipped to a page near the back and Rachel's breath caught. It was a sketch of the lake in front of them. But it wasn't just the lake. There were little details around the edges. A coffee cup, a book, two people sitting on a blanket. Their faces not drawn in, just suggested. And in the corner, in small letters, he'd written a date, from 2 weeks ago. You've been planning this for a while, Rachel said softly. I've been wanting to ask you out for a while, Daniel admitted. I just kept chickening out. Then I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. Show you something real, not just dinner at some loud restaurant where we can barely hear each other. Rachel looked up from the notebook to his face. There was no performance in his expression. No trying to impress or be someone he wasn't, just honesty. I really appreciate this, she said. I can't remember the last time someone put this much thought into anything for me. That's their loss. They sat there for a while, the conversation drifting from topic to topic. Daniel told her about growing up in a small town about an hour away, how he'd moved to the city for school and never left, how his parents thought his creative job was nice but kept asking when he'd get a real career, how he had a cat named Pickles that he'd found in a parking lot and couldn't bring himself to rename despite the ridiculous name the shelter had given him. Rachel laughed more than she had in months. There was something about the setting, about being away from the city and the expectations and the noise, that made everything feel lighter, easier. She told him stories about her family, about her sister who lived across the country and called at the worst times but was still her best friend, about how she stress-baked at 3 a.m. and her freezer was full of muffins she'd never eat. What kind of muffins? Daniel asked. Mostly blueberry, sometimes chocolate chip. I love blueberry muffins. I'll bring you some, Rachel said before she could overthink it. For our next... She stopped, realizing what she'd implied. Daniel grinned. For our next date? I mean, if there is one. If you want there to be one. I'm not assuming anything. Rachel, I literally drew a map for you and set up a lakeside picnic. I'm definitely hoping for a next date. She smiled into her tea mug, hiding the ridiculous grin she couldn't control. After they finished eating, Daniel pulled out his phone and connected it to the speaker. Soft acoustic music started playing. Nothing too loud or overwhelming, just background melody that fit the moment perfectly. I made a playlist, he said, and there was something vulnerable in admitting that. Of course you did. They lay back on the blanket, looking up at the sky through the trees. Clouds drifted lazily past. A bird called out somewhere. The music played, and Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, contentment, the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Can I ask you something? Daniel said after a comfortable silence. Sure. What made you say yes? To this date? Rachel thought about it. Honestly, you seem different. Everyone else at work is always rushing, always stressed. But you'd sit by that window every day with your notebook and you just seemed present. Like you were actually experiencing life instead of just surviving it. I wanted to know what that was like. And? What's the verdict so far? She turned her head to look at him. He was already looking at her and the softness in his eyes made her brave. I think I'd like to experience more of it. Daniel reached over and gently took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. It wasn't rushed or aggressive, just a simple connection that felt right. They stayed at the lake for another hour, talking and laughing and existing in that perfect bubble where the outside world didn't matter. And when Daniel finally said they should probably head back, Rachel felt disappointed for the first time all day. But as they packed up the basket and folded the blanket, Daniel said something that made her heart skip. So the date's not actually over yet. If you're up for part 2. Rachel raised her eyebrows. There's more? There's more. But only if you want to. No pressure. She looked at his hopeful expression, at the careful way he'd packed everything, at the way he kept checking to make sure she was comfortable and happy. I definitely want to, she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The drive back toward town felt different than the drive out. Rachel's nerves had melted away, replaced by a warm curiosity about what Daniel had planned next. She caught herself stealing glances at him as he drove, noticing little things she hadn't before. The way he tapped his thumb against the steering wheel to the rhythm of the music, how he'd smile to himself like he was thinking of something funny but keeping it private. "You're being very mysterious about this part too," Rachel said. "Watching the city buildings come back into view, can't help it. I like seeing your reactions to things. What if my reaction is terrible? What if I hate whatever this is?" Daniel glanced over at her. "Then we'll do something else. The whole point is spending time together, not checking boxes on some perfect date agenda." That simple statement settled something in Rachel's chest. There was no pressure here, no performance anxiety, just two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. And that realization was almost as surprising as the secret lake had been. They drove through a neighborhood Rachel recognized but had never really explored. Older homes with big front porches lined the streets. Trees created a canopy overhead. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks. It felt like a pocket of the city that had somehow avoided becoming overly modern and polished. Daniel pulled into a parking spot in front of what looked like an old community center. The building was brick with white trim, charming in a lived-in way. A hand-painted sign out front read, "Riverside Community Arts Center." There were a few other cars in the lot, and Rachel could see people moving around inside through the large windows. An arts center? Rachel felt her curiosity spike. More specifically, they do classes here. Painting, pottery, photography, that kind of thing. Daniel turned off the car and shifted to face her. "You mentioned you used to draw. That you stopped because you felt like you had to be professionally good at it. I thought maybe we could try something neither of us is good at. Take the pressure off." Rachel's heart did that flutter thing again. "What kind of class?" "Pottery. There's a drop-in session for beginners at 2. I signed us up a couple weeks ago." He paused, reading her expression carefully. "But if that's weird or too much, we can totally skip it. I won't be offended." "No," Rachel said quickly. "No, I think it sounds perfect. I've actually always wanted to try pottery." "I know." She blinked. "How could you possibly know that?" Daniel looked a bit sheepish. "Okay, so there was this one time in the break room about 2 months ago. You were watching something on your phone while you ate lunch. I was making coffee behind you, and I heard you say to whoever you were texting that you'd always wanted to try pottery, but never had the time or excuse to take a class." Rachel's mouth fell open slightly. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot of things you say." "Is that creepy?" "That might be creepy." "It's not creepy," Rachel said softly. "It's actually really sweet. Most people don't listen that closely. Most people are idiots." They walked into the community center together, and the smell hit Rachel immediately. That distinct earthy scent of clay mixed with something else she couldn't quite place. The main room opened into a large studio space with several pottery wheels set up in a circle. Shelves lined the walls, filled with works in progress and finished pieces. Everything felt creative and lived in and wonderfully imperfect. A woman in her 50s with clay-stained jeans and a warm smile greeted them. "You must be Daniel and Rachel. Welcome, welcome. I'm Patricia, but everyone calls me Patty. You picked a good day to try pottery. We've got 3 other beginners today, so you won't feel alone in your failures." "That's reassuring," Rachel laughed. Patty led them to a side area where aprons hung on hooks. "Trust me, you'll want these. Clay gets everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You'll find it in places you didn't know clay could reach." She handed them each an apron covered in colorful paint splatters and clay smudges. "These are our lucky aprons. Every first-timer wears them." As Rachel tied her apron, she noticed the other people in the class. A couple who looked like they were in their 60s, holding hands and laughing about something. A young guy with headphones around his neck who looked nervous. And a woman about Rachel's age with bright purple hair who was already at her wheel, confidently shaping something that actually looked like a bowl. "Don't worry about her," Patty said, noticing Rachel's gaze. "That's Jade. She's been coming for 3 months and thinks she's already a master. She's not, but let her have her confidence." Daniel leaned close to Rachel's ear. "I bet we make better stuff than her." "You're on." Patty gathered everyone around one of the wheels for a demonstration. She made it look effortless, her hands gliding over the wet clay, shaping it into a perfect cylinder that grew taller as she worked. Her movements were fluid and sure, and Rachel felt a spike of anxiety realizing she'd have to replicate that. "Now, the most important thing to remember," Patty said, her hands still working the clay, "is that pottery is about feeling, not thinking. Your hands know what to do. Your brain just gets in the way. So when you sit at your wheel, I want you to stop trying to be perfect and just experience the clay. Let it teach you. She made it sound so simple, so zen. Rachel glanced at Daniel, who was watching the demonstration with intense focus like he was studying for an exam. Then it was time for them to try. Rachel sat at her wheel, and Patty placed a lump of clay in front of her. It was cold and wet and heavier than she expected. Okay, first thing is centering the clay, Patty explained, moving from wheel to wheel. Get your wheel spinning, put your hands on the clay and push it into the center. Use your whole body, not just your arms. Rachel started her wheel and placed her hands on the spinning clay. Immediately it wobbled and fought against her. She pressed harder and the clay squished between her fingers. Too much pressure. She eased up and the clay wobbled more. Not enough pressure. Next to her, Daniel was having similar struggles. His clay looked like it was trying to escape the wheel entirely, flopping around in uneven lumps. This is harder than it looks, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. Way harder, Rachel agreed, laughing as her clay sprayed water droplets across her apron. Patty appeared behind Rachel, placing her hands over Rachel's. Feel that? You're fighting the clay. It's not your enemy. Work with it. Gentle but firm, like you're dancing with it, not wrestling it. With Patty's guidance, Rachel felt the clay start to center. It was a strange sensation, feeling it suddenly cooperate, spinning smoothly under her hands. For a brief moment she understood what Patty meant about feeling instead of thinking. Then Patty moved away, and the clay immediately went rogue again. The next hour was a beautiful disaster. Rachel tried to make a bowl and ended up with something that looked like a sad, lopsided ashtray. Daniel attempted a mug and created what could only be described as a clay blob with a dent in it. The older couple was having the time of their lives, laughing every time their creations collapsed. The nervous guy was so focused he barely blinked, and Jade with the purple hair kept glancing at everyone else's work with barely concealed smugness. Okay, new plan, Daniel said after his third attempt collapsed into itself. Let's make the worst pottery possible. Embrace the chaos? I think we're already doing that, Rachel said, looking at her current project, which resembled a drunk mushroom. But here's what surprised Rachel. She was having fun. Real, genuine, can't-stop-smiling fun. Her hands were covered in clay. Her apron was splattered. There was probably clay in her hair, and she didn't care. For the first time in years, she was creating something without worrying about whether it was good enough or perfect or worthy of being seen. You're smiling, Daniel observed, his own hands elbow-deep in clay. I am. You haven't stopped smiling for the past 20 minutes. Rachel realized he was right. Her face actually hurt a little from smiling so much. I can't remember the last time I did something just for the fun of it. Everything is always so serious. Work is serious. Bills are serious. Adulting is serious. This is just silly and messy, and I love it. Good, Daniel said, attempting to shape his blob into something vaguely cylindrical. That's exactly why I thought we should do this. Patty came around near the end of the session to assess everyone's work. She praised the older couple's matching bowls, gave the nervous guy some encouragement on his surprisingly decent vase, and told Jade her work was coming along nicely, in a tone that suggested otherwise. When she got to Rachel and Daniel's wheels, she paused, studied their creations, tilted her head like she was viewing abstract art. Well, she finally said, these are certainly unique. That's a polite way of saying terrible, Daniel said. I prefer the term charmingly imperfect. Patty grinned. But here's what I like. You both took risks. You experimented. You didn't give up even when things got messy. Spirit of art right there. Not perfection, but persistence and joy. She helped them trim and smooth their pieces, then explained they could come back in 2 weeks to pick up their fired and glazed creations. They'll look better once they're finished, she promised, though her tone suggested not much better. After they cleaned up and returned their aprons, Daniel and Rachel stood in the parking lot, both still finding bits of clay on their hands and arms. So, confession time, Daniel said, picking clay from under his fingernail. I've never done pottery before. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos to prepare, and I still failed spectacularly. You researched pottery for our date? I wanted to know what I was getting us into. Turns out videos don't really prepare you for the reality of fighting with spinning clay. Rachel laughed, and it came from deep in her belly, the kind of laugh that felt like relief. This was perfect, seriously. I know our stuff looked terrible, but I had more fun in the past hour than I've had in months. Mission accomplished then. Daniel checked his phone. It's almost 4. Are you hungry? Because there's one more stop. If you're not completely sick of me yet. One more stop? How much did you plan for today? I might have gone a little overboard, he admitted. But I wanted options. We don't have to do the last part if you're tired or want to head home. Rachel considered. She probably should be tired. They'd been out for hours. But the truth was, she didn't want the day to end. This feeling, this lightness in her chest, she wanted to hold on to it as long as possible. What's the last stop? She asked. Daniel's face lit up. It's a surprise, but I promise it's a good one. And yes, there's food involved. Then I'm in. They got back in the car, and as Daniel drove, Rachel found herself thinking about how different this date was from anything she'd experienced. It wasn't fancy or expensive. There were no impressive restaurants or shows. Instead, it was thoughtful, personal. Each part of the day had been about creating experiences, not just going through motions, and Daniel had paid attention, not just to what she'd said directly, but to the small things, the offhand comments, the passing wishes. He'd taken those fragments and built something meaningful from them. Can I ask you something? Rachel said as they drove through the early evening streets. Always. Why me? I mean, we've barely talked at work. How did you know you wanted to ask me out? Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. You remember that day it rained really hard? About 3 months ago? Rachel thought back. Sort of. Everyone was trying to get to their cars without getting wet. Running, covering their heads with folders and bags. But you just walked. Right through the rain. And you were smiling. Like you were enjoying it. I watched you from the window and I thought, that's someone who knows how to find joy in unexpected moments. I wanted to know more about you after that. Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. Such a small moment. She barely remembered it. But he'd seen something in it. Seen something in her? I like rain, she said quietly. I know, Daniel replied, and I really like you. The car ride was filled with comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. Rachel watched the city pass by, noticing things she'd driven past 100 times, but never really seen. A bookstore with plants hanging in the windows. A mural of birds on the side of a building. The way the late afternoon sun hit the glass towers downtown, making them glow gold. Daniel navigated through streets with the ease of someone who'd planned the route carefully. They passed through the business district, then into an older neighborhood where the buildings were shorter and had more character. Rachel recognized the area vaguely but couldn't quite place why. We're getting close, Daniel said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Close your eyes. Really? The whole close your eyes thing? Trust me. It'll be worth it. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling silly but also thrilled in a way she couldn't quite explain. She felt the car slow, heard the turn signal clicking, then the crunch of gravel under the tires as they pulled into a parking spot. Okay, keep them closed, Daniel said. She heard his door open and close, then her door opening. He took her hand and his palm was warm against hers. Watch your step. There's a curb. He guided her carefully and Rachel could smell something sweet on the air. Sugar and vanilla and something else she couldn't identify. She heard children's laughter somewhere nearby. A bell chiming as a door opened. Okay, Daniel said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Open. Rachel opened her eyes and immediately felt her breath catch. They were standing in front of Sweetheart's ice cream parlor, a place she hadn't seen in years. The building was exactly as she remembered it. Pink and white striped awning, vintage lettering on the windows. The same red door with the brass handle shaped like an ice cream cone. How did you... Rachel started, but her voice caught. You told someone on the phone, I think it was your sister, that you used to come here every summer when you were a kid, that it was your favorite place in the whole city, and you were sad when you thought it had closed down. I thought it did close down. I drove by here maybe 5 years ago and it was empty. It did close for a while. The original owner retired, but his granddaughter reopened it about 2 years ago. Same recipes, same style. I looked it up after I heard you mention it. Rachel stared at the building, memories flooding back. Coming here with her dad every Saturday afternoon during summer break. The way he'd let her get 2 scoops even though her mom said 1 was enough. How they'd sit at the little tables outside and he'd tell her silly jokes that made her laugh so hard, ice cream would come out of her nose. Her dad had passed away 4 years ago, heart attack sudden and cruel, and she'd avoided this neighborhood ever since because it hurt too much to remember. But standing here now with Daniel, the hurt felt different. Softer somehow, like the memory could be sweet again instead of just painful. I haven't been here since I was 12, Rachel said quietly. We don't have to go in if it's too much, Daniel said immediately, reading the emotion in her voice. We can go somewhere else, anywhere you want. Rachel looked at him, this person who barely knew her but somehow understood her, who'd taken the time to find a place that mattered even if he didn't know the full story behind why. No, she said, squeezing his hand. I want to go in. I think I need to go in. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Rachel was transported back in time. The interior was almost identical to how she remembered. Black and white checkered floor. Pink vinyl booths along the wall. A long counter with chrome stools. And behind the counter, a display case filled with colorful ice cream in metal tubs. A young woman with a blonde ponytail and a pink apron looked up and smiled. Welcome to Sweethearts. First time here? Not for me, Rachel said, walking slowly to the counter. I used to come here as a kid. Is Mr. Henderson still involved? The woman's smile widened. That's my grandpa. He comes in sometimes to check on things and tell me I'm doing everything wrong. She laughed. I'm Lily. You knew the original shop? It was my favorite place in the world when I was little. Then you have to try the Rainbow Surprise. It's Grandpa's original recipe, same as always. Rachel looked at the case and saw it. Rainbow sherbet swirled with vanilla ice cream and bits of fruit. Her childhood favorite, the thing she'd order every single time. I'll take a cone of that, she said, feeling her eyes get misty. 2 scoops and make it 2, Daniel added. I'll try the salted caramel. They took their ice cream to one of the small tables by the window. The same tables Rachel had sat at 20 years ago, probably refinished but still the same style. She took a bite of the Rainbow Surprise and the taste hit her like a time machine, exactly as she remembered. Sweet and tart and creamy all at once, good? Daniel asked. Perfect, Rachel said, and a tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. Daniel's expression shifted to concern. Hey, what's wrong? We can leave if… No, it's not bad tears, Rachel interrupted, wiping her cheek with her napkin. I used to come here with my dad. Every Saturday in the summer. It was our thing. He died 4 years ago and I couldn't come back here after that. It hurt too much, she'd said it out loud. She'd shared something deeply personal with someone she was still getting to know. And instead of feeling vulnerable or exposed, she felt lighter. Daniel reached across the table and took her free hand. He didn't say anything, didn't try to fix it or minimize it, just held her hand and let her feel what she needed to feel. He would have liked this place being open again, Rachel continued. He always said the best things in life were simple. Good ice cream. Summer afternoons. Time with people you love. She looked at Daniel. Thank you for bringing me here. For helping me remember the good parts. I'm glad we came, Daniel said softly. And for what it's worth, I think your dad had it right. The best things are simple. They ate their ice cream and talked about lighter things. Daniel told her about his terrible first attempt at making pottery at home after watching those YouTube videos. How he'd gotten clay everywhere and his cat had walked through it, leaving tiny gray paw prints all over his apartment. Rachel shared stories about her and her sister's childhood adventures, like the time they tried to build a fort in the backyard and accidentally destroyed their mom's garden. The conversation flowed easy and natural, punctuated by laughter and comfortable pauses. Other customers came and went. A family with 3 kids all arguing about flavors. An elderly couple who clearly came here often based on how Lily greeted them. A teenager on what was obviously a first date, nervous and awkward in a way that made Rachel remember her own terrible teenage dating experiences. Can I show you something? Daniel asked after they'd finished their ice cream. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos, then handed it to her. On the screen was a picture of the ice cream parlor, but it was a sketch, not a photo. He'd drawn it, she realized. The building, the awning, the details of the windows. And in the foreground, he'd drawn 2 people sitting at a table by the window, their faces turned toward each other. When did you do this? Rachel asked, zooming in on the details. Last week. After I'd finalized all the plans for today. I wanted to visualize it. Make sure it felt right. Rachel scrolled through a few more photos and found other sketches. The lake from that morning with 2 figures on a blanket. The community center with pottery wheels visible through the windows. Each one had the same 2 figures. Never with detailed faces, just suggestions of people existing in these spaces together. You planned this entire day, Rachel said, looking up from the phone. Every single part of it. How long did you spend thinking about this? Daniel shifted in his seat, suddenly looking self-conscious. Is it too much, be honest? Did I go overboard? It's the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me, Rachel said, and she meant every word. I didn't even know someone could be this attentive. This present. You deserve someone who pays attention, Daniel said simply. You deserve someone who listens to the things you say, even the little things. Especially the little things. Those are the things that show who you really are. Rachel felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This was one date. They'd known each other for less than a year, most of that time spent as casual co-workers who barely spoke. But sitting here in this ice cream parlor with the taste of childhood on her tongue, and this man who'd somehow seen her when she didn't think anyone was looking, Rachel felt something shift inside her. Maybe this was what it was supposed to feel like. Not the butterflies and nervousness, though those were there too, but this sense of being understood, of being valued for who she actually was, not who she pretended to be or who she thought she should be. I haven't been myself in a long time, Rachel admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. I think I forgot how. Got too caught up in being professional and responsible and all the things you're supposed to be as an adult. And who is yourself? Daniel asked. When you strip away all the supposed to be's. Rachel thought about it. Someone who likes walking in the rain. Who stress bakes at 3 a.m. Who still wants to create things even if they're not perfect. Who values connections more than accomplishments. She paused. Someone who really wants to know you better. Daniel's smile was soft and genuine. I'd really like that. Getting to know the real you. And you getting to know the real me, which is someone who overthinks everything and plans too much but means well. Who talks to his cat like he's a person. Who'd rather spend a Saturday exploring random places than going to fancy restaurants. Who's been hoping for months that you'd say yes if he asked you out. Months? I told you. The day I saw you walking in the rain, that was 3 months ago. I've been working up the courage since then. Rachel reached across the table and took his hand this time. I'm really glad you finally did. They sat there for a while longer, watching the sun start to dip lower in the sky through the window. The light turned golden, that magic hour where everything looked like it belonged in a painting. Lily came by to ask if they wanted anything else, and Daniel ordered 2 cookies to go, insisting they were the best cookies in the city according to online reviews. As they got ready to leave, Rachel paused by the counter. Does your grandfather still come in? Usually Sundays, Lily said. Why? Just tell him that one of his old customers came back. The girl who always got Rainbow Surprise? Tell him she said thank you. Lily's expression softened. I will. And you should come back when he's here. He loves seeing old customers. I think I will, Rachel said, and she meant it. Outside, the evening air was cooler. People were heading home from work, the streets busier than they'd been all day. Daniel walked Rachel to the passenger side of the car but didn't open the door immediately. So, he said, leaning against the car, how was your first date in years? Honestly? It was perfect. Every part of it. You somehow took all these random pieces of conversations I barely remember having and turned them into the best day I've had in a long time. Just a long time? Not the best day ever? Rachel pretended to think about it. Well, there was that time I found $20 in my coat pocket. That was pretty great. Daniel laughed, and Rachel realized how much she loved that sound, how much she wanted to hear it again and again. Seriously, though, she said, today meant a lot to me, more than you probably realize. It meant a lot to me, too, Daniel said, getting to spend the whole day with you. Seeing you smile, hearing you laugh. That's better than any plan I could have made. They stood there in the parking lot as the sun continued its descent, not quite ready for the day to end, but knowing it had to eventually. And Rachel found herself thinking about something her dad used to say, that the best moments in life were the ones you wanted to hold on to forever, even though you knew you couldn't. The trick was to appreciate them fully while they lasted. She was definitely appreciating this one. The drive back to Rachel's apartment felt different from every other part of the day. The excitement and discovery had settled into something warmer, something that felt like contentment mixed with the bittersweet awareness that the day was ending. Daniel had turned the music down low, and they drove through the city streets as the streetlights began flickering on, one by one, against the deepening blue of twilight. Rachel watched the familiar landmarks pass by, thinking about how the same city could feel completely different depending on who you were experiencing it with. She'd driven these streets 1,000 times, but tonight they felt new somehow, full of possibilities she hadn't noticed before. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Daniel asked, glancing over at her. "I'm thinking about how I almost said no," Rachel admitted, "when you asked me out. I almost convinced myself it wouldn't be worth the risk. That dating was too complicated and I was better off just focusing on work. What changed your mind?" "Honestly?" The envelope. The hand-drawn map. It was such a small thing, but it showed you'd put thought into even the invitation, and I figured anyone who draws maps for first dates might be worth taking a chance on. Daniel smiled. "Remind me to thank my third-grade art teacher. She's the one who got me into drawing." They pulled up in front of Rachel's apartment building, and Daniel put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. This was it. The moment where the date officially ended. Where they'd have to figure out what came next or if there would even be a next. Rachel didn't want to get out of the car. She wanted to stay in this bubble they'd created, where the outside world and all its complications didn't exist, but she could see the light on in her apartment, could see her neighbor's cat sitting in the window 2 floors up, and reality was creeping back in whether she liked it or not. "So," Daniel said, and she could hear the nervousness back in his voice. "I had a really good time today." "Me too. The best time, actually. Better than finding $20. High praise," he teased, but his eyes were serious. "Rachel, I know we work together, and that might make things complicated. And I know one good date doesn't mean we're suddenly in a relationship or anything, but I really want to see you again. Outside of work like this, if you want to." "I want to," Rachel said immediately. "Definitely." No question, relief washed over Daniel's face. "Yeah?" "Yeah. And not just because I need to pick up that disaster pottery in 2 weeks, although that's definitely a bonus." Daniel laughed, and some of the tension in the car dissolved. "How about dinner next weekend? Somewhere normal where we don't have to create anything or solve any mysteries. Just food and conversation." "That sounds perfect. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "I get to plan something too. Not for next weekend, but the time after that. It's only fair that you get to experience a date designed around all the random things I've noticed about you." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "You've noticed things about me?" "Of course I have. Did you think you were the only one paying attention?" "I kind of did, actually." Rachel shifted in her seat to face him more fully. "You bring the same lunch every Tuesday. Turkey sandwich, apple, and those weird seaweed chips that smell terrible. You take your coffee black, which is insane, but you always add 2 sugars when you think no one's watching. You tap your pen exactly 3 times before you start drawing. You have a different notebook for work stuff and personal stuff, and you never mix them up. And you always hold the door for people even when they're really far away, and it makes everything awkward." Daniel stared at her, and Rachel couldn't quite read his expression. Had she gone too far? Was it creepy that she'd noticed all these things? "I had no idea you saw any of that," he finally said.